Jason Rasmussen says, your thoughts on Walt Disney the man and the Disney Company. Well, I think that's an interesting question for a number of reasons. First of all, I think Walt Disney was a genius. I really think he was a genius. I remember the first time I went to Disney World. I'd been to Disney. I grew up in Florida after I left. Bermuda, and so I only went to Disneyland as an adult. By the way, I might have mentioned this before, but if you started out in Disney World in Florida, and that's all you'd seen, and then you go to Disneyland in California, it is shocking how small things are. Shocking. I remember needless to say, if you're a kid growing up in Florida, in Miami, you go to Disney World. When a teenager, you go every couple times a year. And when I finally, as a full-grown adult, saw Disneyland, I saw Cinderella's castle at Disneyland. I thought it was Cinderella's tool shed or Cinderella's guest house. It was, shocking. So I was at Disney World in 1972, right when they opened. I may have actually been there before they opened to the public. My dad was a hotel manager. I think we had a friend who was the manager of the Contemporary Hotel in Disney World. So since you asked about what I think about Walt Disney the man versus Walt Disney the company, when I saw the Contemporary Hotel, I was probably 72. I was 13 years old. And the Contemporary, for those of you who don't know it or haven't been there, it's a little dated looking now, but it's basically two concrete slabs like this where the rooms go down the length of the building and there are interiors with an open space, these two concrete slabs, and the monorails go right through the lobby. And I remember when I was staying there that first night, I got up at, I got up at midnight or something. Everybody else, the whole family was asleep, and I just kind of snuck out the door in the room and looked down from, we were up on the 15th floor or something, and I looked down on this giant open canyon of concrete and beautifully done and everything, and these monorails just moving through there. And I thought, this is it, man. This is the future. So I have enormous admiration for Walt Disney, and enormous admiration. I think the first time I saw the Haunted Mansion, I remember thinking, this is genuinely, it's different than a movie. This is actual human magic in real time. When you would see the ghosts inside your little car, you'd see all the people, dancing in the ghost dancing in the room, or the talking head on the crystal ball. And I learned how to do all of these effects, by the way. They're really interesting. Since I love this kind of geeking out on little details. For those of you who've been on the Haunted Mansion, just so you know how so many of these effects were done and how brilliant they are, just to give you an idea of how brilliant this is. There's a moment on the ride in the Haunted Mansion where everybody's in their own little cart, obviously, and you're getting the audio feed, and you come across you're looking down, you're up high, and you're looking down on a ballroom. And it's an old abandoned kind of ballroom, and all the fruit is all decayed and it's dusty and cobwebs are everywhere. And you're looking down, it's clearly a real ballroom. It's clearly a real giant ballroom. And as you look down, you see all of these dancing ghosts, and they're transparent. You can see right through them, and they're dancing around on the floor in this ballroom. And you think, my God, how do they do that? And the way they do it is there is a partially reflective piece of glass that is extremely clean all the time. It's crystal clear and clean. It's way out of touch, obviously. And so what's happening is, as you're up high, you're looking through this glass. And as you look through the glass, you see the actual ballroom, which is an actual physical set, just like any other movie set. And there's nothing in it. But underneath your cart, directly underneath where you are a series of articulated ghost figures, real figures. They're like mannequins, and they're painted, fluorescent colors and so on. And they're articulated, and they're in a black background, and all they do is do the dancing and go around and spin around. And what happens is, when you look down into the ballroom, most of what you're seeing is seeing through this partially reflected mirror. So you're seeing most of it is coming straight through the glass to the ballroom, but some small percentage of what's going on directly underneath you is reflected off of that glass and into your eye, and your eye superimposes what's going on beneath you with the moving with the moving ghosts, and your eye superimposes that reflected image onto the practical image, which is directly straight ahead, and you then put the two together and you see ghosts dancing in a room. And it's the same thing with the mirror. When you go by the mirror and you see you're in the room, you're in your little cart, and as you go by, you can see yourself, and in your cart with you is a ghost. Well, obviously, you're seeing your own reflection, and part of it is seeing through, and there's a little synchronized ghost figure that kind of goes with you. All of it's fantastic. It's brilliant. So, of all the things I think I like most about the Disney company, I like the idea that these guys were called Imagineers, because that's really what it is. It's Imagineering. It's engineering imagination. And so let's get back kind of to the guts of the question, the thoughts on Disney the man versus Disney the company. The man was a genius. And the reason I think this is such a good question is because it's a great example of individuality. It's a great example of individual vision. Apple Computer, this thing, I keep coming back to this thing is a result of Steve Jobs. You could say that this was built by hundreds or designed by hundreds of engineers and thousands and thousands and thousands of workers, but none of those people are essential. The only thing that's essential is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs went to his engineers and said, this is what I want. They said, it's not possible. We can't do it. He said, well, it is possible. We're going to find a way. They can't make glass that. Well, we'll make some glass. Well, we can't get the receiver or the battery. Well, we're going to have to do it because this is what I want. It's the vision. It's the vision of individuals that make things happen. It's true in aerospace too, by the way. We have these, cost plus programs and all this other stuff. But back in the day, back when we were going from, flying at 400 miles an hour to flying at nearly 4,000 miles an hour, 3,000 miles an hour, was back in the day of companies that were founded by individuals who had vision, and most of them left their names on their companies. Most of those companies have been absorbed into other companies. But if I mention some names like Hughes, Lockheed, the Lockheed brothers, Northrop, Grumman, Cessna, Lear, and I can go on and on and on and on and on. These are people who had vision, and that vision was executed, and that's why they're so successful. You can't do that by committee. You cannot make Disney World by committee. That is the vision of one man who through his imagination and his insight and his either his or his associates' business savvy was given the resources to execute his vision. Disney was a genius. And I almost forgot this, and I sure didn't want to. Everything that I am, the Sid Mead pictures in the background and the airplanes and the flying and the eject, and afterburner fire, all that stuff, is a result of the wonderful world of Disney, watching Tomorrowland rather, segments, animations of the Werner von Braun animations of orbital spaceflight. You got 7 guys in this winged vehicle, and they all number 1, number 6, number 5, and they're triangulating their position with these things with little, little prisms, and here comes a satellite, and it's like the first orbital mission, and there was nothing magic about it. It wasn't Star Trek even, or Star Wars. It was like, yeah, of course we can do this. It's going to just be a rocket. We can go. Let's go. Let's do it. Time for a quick white balance. So it's all vision. And yet what happens is, after that person dies, or whatever, somebody just sorry, I had to stop. Precious Snowflake said I said somebody executed. Obviously, I didn't mean to call for anybody's actual execution when I said executed. Needless to say, I meant to say by executing, I mean fulfilled the operational requirements. And I deeply apologize for using the word executed, which I know is a very, very sensitive subject, and certainly didn't mean to get anybody excited or upset. And the last thing I would want is for anybody to say that or to think that I'm in favor of going out and executing people, which is utterly, utterly ridiculous. And I deeply, deeply, deeply apologize for using that offensive word. Thank you very much for pointing that out, Precious Snowflake. You are now my legal advisor. So what happens, though, is that when these people of vision die or retire, the company usually just falls apart. And you can see it right now with Apple, and you saw it with Disney a long time ago. a great example of practical example of the difference between Walt Disney and the Walt Disney Company was pretty early, because after Disney World opened, they opened Epcot, which is the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Walt's idea for Epcot was that people would actually live there. When he said experimental prototype community of tomorrow, Walt's vision was that it would be, in fact, an experimental prototype community of tomorrow, and that people would live there. They would not. It's not that they would live in the park. The park would be open to people living in this experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And that was the vision. And basically Walt's vision for Epcot was, why don't we bring the future into the present and have people live there and see how it looks? And it was a brilliant idea. I don't know if it was ever possible, but it was certainly a brilliant idea. And then as soon as Walt died, the company people took it over, and they basically said, okay, we can't really quite do that. It's not really practical. So let's just make it about a bunch of future rides. And Epcot's appalling. Epcot is awful. It's a Monsanto ad and a this ad. And look, I don't mind that. I mean, some of the big sponsors of Disney over at the Magic Kingdom are, used to be Monsanto and all those guys. I don't have any problem with the corporate sponsorship, but there wasn't about anything. It was this kind of, low-level sort of... Ugh. And then you take that another generation away from Walt himself, and then you open up with this debacle out here called Disney's California Adventure. I don't know if 8 people have ever gone to California Adventure. I never have. Why you would have a California Adventure in California is utterly beyond me. It's one of the most epic failures of all time. There's no way in a million years Walt Disney would have approved that. So the reason I think it's an interesting question, Jason, is that when there is a person in charge, when there is a visionary with a vision and a company behind him, things will get done. But when that visionary disappears and you are left with bureaucracies, nothing gets done. Bureaucracies don't create things. They can't invent things. In fact, the essential requirement of a bureaucracy is to make sure that nothing happens. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen this too, where you have somebody will go and convince I've had this experience personally. You'll go and convince somebody, high net worth individual or something, let's say, of some idea, and they're on fire to do it, and then it gets run past their management people and their lawyers and their financial people and so on, and then nothing gets done. It gets bogged down because people just, I don't know what it is. But I do know that history, especially modern history, post-World War II history, it goes back longer than that, but even to the era of the so-called robber barons, which is a great interview I did, really a lot of those guys were not robber barons. Point I'm trying to make is a guy named Cornelius Vanderbilt comes along and decides he wants to get in the shipping business, and he lowers shipping rates for people, ticket prices, not by a factor of 10, but almost by a factor of 100. Opens up transatlantic shipping. Some guy decides he's going to compete with the subsidized railroads, and his railroad is better, and they move freight at a fraction of the cost. And it's all about vision, and it's about Ford and Edison and Carnegie and Jobs, Gates. Bill Gates gets a lot of grief, and I'm not a fan of what Microsoft became. I certainly love the fact I just became fully Apple guy because all my devices all work and they all talk to each other. But I was a PC guy for most of my life, and most people don't remember. But in the early days of personal computing, when I got started, you literally had to decide what operating system does this computer run. I mean, you'd have so many pieces of software that would only run on certain machines and not on others. So the fact that Microsoft came along and standardized things and made sure that everybody was, that you could at least have a standard for software and communication and file sharing and stuff, was huge. It was enormous. And so, it really does come down to individuals. And when you see what eventually happens, there were times when Disney just became just appalling. I have to tell you, I probably shouldn't say this because undoubtedly it will be trumpeted into my utter contempt for the Holocaust and my personal hatred for all Jewish people everywhere. But I'll risk it. Here in Los Angeles, Disney has animation studios here. They have in Burbank, they've got their kind of their corporate office. And when Disney was run by Disney, it was a magical place to be, and everybody loved it. But when Eisner took over, everything got very, very corporate, got very cutthroat. And so people who worked there at the two campuses here referred to the two campuses that Disney had in Burbank. They referred to the first one as Mauschwitz and the second one as Dachau. That's how appalling and awful the conditions were. And that's because the vision of Walt Disney, who understood that creativity was what he was selling and happiness was what he was selling, paid the best people to do the best work. And then along comes a manager like Eisner, who decides he's going to grow the brand and who's going to make all these efficiencies. And they make the work environment so awful that creative people call the place they go to work Mauschwitz. Is it any wonder that this stuff is, falling apart? It's true for Disney. It's true for every other company. They've still managed to preserve their brand by and large, but we won't see the likes of Walt for a while, I don't think. So anyway, somebody new will come along, hopefully, and we'll see how that works out.